Zalvera stood before the grand throne of her father, High Lord Vortin, leader of the mighty Zarkith Dominion. The hall was filled with nobles, warriors, and advisors, all staring at her with cold, disapproving eyes. She had known this moment was coming, but it still felt like a nightmare. "You refuse the Union." Vortin's voice echoed through the chamber, deep and heavy with disappointment. Zalvera clenched her fists. "Yes, father. I will not marry Lord Karthos." A murmur spread through the crowd. No one refused the will of the High Lord. Marriage among the noble houses was a matter of power, not love. By rejecting this union, Zalvera had insulted not only Karthos but the entire Dominion. "Karthos is a strong warrior," Vortin said. "A union with him would secure our rule." "He is cruel," Zalvera said firmly. "He sees people as nothing but tools. I will not buy my life to a man like him." Vortin's golden eyes darkened. "You speak as if your wishes matter. You are a daughter of the Dominion. Your duty is to serve." Zalvera's heart pounded. She had expected anger, but hearing her father dismiss her so easily still hurt. She had trained as a warrior, fought in battles, and proved her strength. Yet to him, she was still just a piece on a political chessboard. "I have served," she said. "I have fought. But I will not be a prisoner in a life I did not choose." Vortin's expression hardened. He rose from his throne, his dark armor gleaming under the grand hall's lights. "Then you are no longer my daughter." Silence fell. Even the harshest nobles seemed shocked. "You will leave this world," Vortin continued. "Your name will be erased from the records. You are no longer Zarkith." Zalvera felt a cold wave wash over her. Exile. The worst fate for a noble. She would have preferred death. It would have been quicker, more honorable. But this was a slow death. Vortin turned away from her. "Take her away." The guard stepped forward, but Zalvera did not resist. She kept her head high as they led her out of the hall. If her father wished to shame her, she would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. The journey to exile was swift. She was taken to a transport ship, given only basic supplies, and sent to the outer regions of space. No honor guard, no farewell, just silence. She sat in the cold metal chamber of the ship, staring at the stars beyond the window. The Dominion had been her entire world. Now she had nothing. Where would she go? The outer systems were dangerous, filled with criminals, pirates, and species who hated the Zarkith. There was one place she was certain to find trouble: human space. The Dominion had fought humans many times, but they were different from the other species. They were stubborn, unpredictable, and defied every expectation. The Zarkith saw them as lesser beings, yet time and again, humans proved themselves dangerous. Perhaps, she thought, that was where she belonged. The ship landed on Kelros 7, a human colony on the edge of their territory. It was a dusty, rugged world, barely developed. Humans were still expanding their reach, still fighting to claim new planets. Zalvera stepped out of the ship and into the crowded marketplace. She pulled her cloak tighter around her, hiding her features. If the humans knew who she was, they might try to kill her. The air was filled with voices, laughter, and the smell of food. Humans were loud, expressive, and completely different from the disciplined, silent warriors of the Dominion. As she walked through the market, she noticed a group of men cornering a smaller, unarmed figure, a young human boy. The men, likely mercenaries, laughed as they pushed him around. "Where's your money, kid?" One of them sneered. I don't have any," the boy stammered. Zalvera knew she should not interfere. She had no allies here, no power, but something inside her burned at the sight of the weak being mistreated by the strong. Without thinking, she stepped forward. "Leave him alone," she said. The mercenaries turned. Their leader, a bulky man with a scar across his cheek, frowned. "And who are you supposed to be?" Zalvera pulled back her hood, revealing her alien features. The mercenaries froze. They had likely never seen a Zarkith up close before. "I said, leave him alone," she repeated. The leader chuckled. "You must be lost, alien. This isn't your world." "I do not need a world to break you," Gazalvera said, stepping closer. The men hesitated. She could see the uncertainty in their eyes. They knew her kind were stronger, faster, but they had numbers. Before they could decide what to do, a voice cut through the tension. "That's enough." A tall human man stepped forward, wearing a battered military jacket. He carried himself like a soldier, calm, confident, dangerous. The mercenaries muttered among themselves before backing away. The man turned to Zalvera. "You've got guts, stepping in like that." She studied him. "And you are?" "Captain Ilias Carter," he said, extending a hand. "And I think we need to talk." Zalvera hesitated, then took his hand. She had been cast out, alone in a galaxy that saw her as an enemy. But something told her this meeting would change everything. For the first time since her exile, she felt something close to hope. Zalvera followed Captain Elias Carter through the dusty streets of Kelros 7, her mind still racing from the encounter with the mercenaries. She had expected to be attacked, expected the humans to turn on her, just as the Zarkith had so many times before. But Elias had intervened, and now she found herself walking alongside him as though they were equals. "You're not from around here, are you?" Elias asked, his voice steady but curious. Zalvera glanced at him. His eyes were sharp, scanning their surroundings, yet there was a warmth in his demeanor. He wasn't afraid of her, even though he must have known what she was. She had expected fear or hatred from humans, but there was something different about him. "I am not," she replied simply. "I am far from home." Elias nodded, his boots crunching on the gravel beneath them. "I could tell. Most people here aren't quite so striking. People would notice you if you stayed too long in the open." Zalvera said nothing. She wasn't used to being noticed for anything other than her rank or bloodline. On Zarkith, she had been raised to be seen and never questioned, to move through life like a piece on a grand chessboard. But here, she was just another face in the crowd. They reached a small, quiet building tucked between two larger shops. The sign outside read, "The Rusty Blade," in faded lettering. Elias pushed open the door, and they entered. Inside, it was dim, filled with the low hum of conversation and clinking glasses. A few scattered figures sat around the room, some alone, others in groups, all talking in hushed tones. "Safe house?" Zalvera asked, eyeing the place warily. Elias smiled slightly. "More like a place to lay low for a bit. Not many questions asked here." He led her to a corner where a small table sat, and they both sat down. A waitress quickly appeared, handing them menus before moving on. "You said you wanted to talk," Zalvera said, folding her arms. "So, what is it you want with me?" Elias studied her for a moment, then leaned back in his chair. "You're different. Most people would have run from those mercenaries, or worse, fought them, and ended up dead." Zalvera tilted her head. "Is that how humans behave? Run or fight?" "We fight for what matters," Elias answered with a slight grin. "And we don't run when there's something worth standing for." Zalvera considered his words. She had seen humans fight for survival, but she hadn't yet seen what they truly valued. She had seen their wars, their petty disagreements. But Elias seemed different. There was a quiet strength in him that made her curious. "Why did you step in to stop them?" she asked. "What is it to you if some mercenaries cause trouble?" Elias's expression softened, and he sighed. "People like that. Mercenaries, pirates, they think they own the place. They think they can do whatever they want because they're stronger or have a weapon. I don't stand by and let that happen." Zalvera was silent for a moment. She had lived most of her life in the strict discipline of the Zarkith Dominion, where power and control were everything. But Elias seemed to fight for something else, something beyond power. "I don't belong here," she said quietly. "I was cast out of my world. My own people turned their backs on me. Elias's gaze softened further. I'm sorry to hear that. Do you understand what it's like? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. To be betrayed by your own. To be thrown away like an old weapon. Elias paused, considering her words. I don't know your world, but I know what it's like to be pushed aside. To feel like you don't matter. Like you're just another cog in a machine. Zalvera looked up sharply. Was he comparing her to the humans he seemed to so often despise? Was he saying that she wasn't special in his eyes, that she was no different from anyone else? But Elias spoke again before she could respond. But you're not just any cog. You're more than that. And if you want, I think I can help you find something worth fighting for. The word hung in the air between them. Something stirred in Zalvera's chest, something she hadn't felt since her exile. Hope. How can you help me? She asked, her voice tinged with doubt. Elias leaned forward slightly. You've got skill. I've seen it. You're not just some noble who's been trained to fight because of status. You're a warrior. I've fought beside enough soldiers to know the difference, and you're stronger than most of the people I know. Zalvera felt a flicker of pride at his words, though she quickly masked it. She had always known she was a strong fighter, but hearing it from someone else was different. I'm not sure what I want, she said, looking down at the table. I don't know where I belong anymore. Elias paused, considering. Belonging isn't something that just happens, Zalvera. It's something you choose. And right now, you've got a chance to choose your own path. You could fight for what you believe in. You could find a cause that makes you feel like you matter. Zalvera stared at him, unsure. She had always been defined by her father's expectations. She had never known freedom like this. To choose her path. To fight for something of her own. It was a terrifying thought. I don't know if I can, she said quietly. You don't have to know right now, Elias replied with a smile. But I think you'll figure it out. And for the first time in a long while, Zalvera believed him. Days passed, and the quiet life Zalvera had hoped to build on Kelros 7 never materialized. Instead, Elias's words from that evening stayed with her. She wasn't just a warrior anymore. She was someone with choices, someone who could forge a new future. The question now was, what future would she choose? After a few weeks of getting to know Elias better, she realized he had been more than kind to her. He had helped her find a place to stay, a small room at the edge of the colony, far from the crowded markets. He had introduced her to others like him, humans who had been through their own struggles and found a way to survive in the wild fringes of space. Despite the warmth Elias had shown, Zalvera knew she couldn't stay forever. She wasn't just a stranger in this new world. She was an alien, and sooner or later, her past would catch up to her. The Zarkith Dominion would never forget her refusal to marry Lord Karthos, and the very thought of her returning to face their wrath made her uneasy. One afternoon, as she was cleaning her weapons and preparing to go on another mission with Elias, he walked into her small quarters with a serious expression on his face. I think we need to talk, he said, sitting down across from her. His tone was heavier than usual. Zalvera raised an eyebrow. About what? He hesitated for a moment before speaking again. About keeping you safe. Zalvera frowned. I don't need anyone to protect me. Elias smiled, but there was no humor in his eyes. I'm not talking about protecting you from danger. I'm talking about protection from politics, from the people who might come looking for you. Zalvera's heart skipped a beat. She had been trying not to think about the Zarkith, trying to forget about the powerful empire she had left behind. But she knew that, eventually, they would come. She was no longer a noble in their eyes. She was a traitor. What do you mean? She asked, keeping her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. I've been thinking about it a lot, Elias said. Your past is going to catch up to you. You can't hide forever. Zalvera felt the weight of his words press down on her. She knew he was right. Sooner or later, someone would find her, whether it was bounty hunters or agents from the Dominion itself. "I'll figure something out," she said quietly. Elias shook his head. "That's the thing, Exalvera. You don't have to do it alone." Zalvera was confused. "What are you suggesting?" Elias stood and walked toward the window, looking out at the sprawling colony below. He took a deep breath before turning back to face her. "I think we need to get married." Zalvera blinked, surprised. "Married?" "Yeah. It's the only way to protect you legally here. The humans would recognize the marriage, and you'd have some standing. You'd have protection as my wife." Elias's voice was calm, but Zalvera could see the uncertainty in his eyes. She was silent for a long time, her thoughts racing. A marriage of convenience. That's what it would be. No love, no promises of forever. Just a practical solution to a very real problem. But could she really agree to something like this? "You don't have to do it out of pity," Elias added, his voice gentle. "I'm not asking for anything other than a legal arrangement. It's a way to keep you safe, and you could walk away whenever you wanted." Zalvera studied him for a long moment. She knew Elias wasn't asking this lightly. He was trying to help her in a world where she had no allies, no family, and no standing. A marriage was a strange proposal, but it might be the only way to shield her from the dangers that loomed over her head. I don't know," Zalvera said finally, unsure. "It feels wrong. A marriage should mean more than just survival." Elias nodded. "I get it. It's not ideal. But sometimes the world doesn't give us ideal choices, and this might be the safest one." She thought about it for a moment. The Dominion would never leave her in peace. They would come for her, and even if she ran, they would chase her across the galaxy. She had no choice but to accept help from the humans she had once seen as nothing more than a nuisance. "I agree," Exalvera said finally, though her voice was filled with hesitation. "But we must be clear. This is not about love. This is about survival." Elias gave a small, understanding smile. "I know. No strings attached. Just a way to keep you safe." Zalvera nodded. In the end, it was a small price to pay for the protection she needed. The idea of marriage still felt foreign to her, too human, too simple, but Elias's offer gave her hope. It gave her a chance to breathe, to plan, and to live without constantly looking over her shoulder. The next day, they made it official. A small ceremony, no fanfare, no grand promises, just a simple exchange of vows in front of a human official who didn't care about titles or lineage. Just the two of them. Zalvera didn't feel like a wife. She felt like a woman who had made a difficult choice. But it was a choice that, for the first time in her life, felt like it was entirely hers. Later that evening, Elias and Zalvera stood together outside her quarters, watching the twin moons of Kelros 7 rise in the sky. "We did the right thing," Elias said quietly. Zalvera nodded. "I hope so." They didn't need to say anything else. The weight of their new bond, their new partnership, was enough to fill the space between them. And though Zalvera had started this journey alone, for the first time in a long time, she felt that she was no longer alone. Weeks passed since Zalvera and Elias's marriage, and life on Kelros 7 continued as usual. But for Zalvera, the calm was deceptive. She knew that every moment she spent on this distant colony, she was still a target. The Zarkith Dominion would not forget her refusal to marry Lord Karthos, and her exile was a stain on her bloodline that could never be erased. Her new life with Elias had brought her some peace. The human captain was everything she hadn't expected, kind, honorable, and fiercely protective. Yet he always respected her independence. He had introduced her to his small crew, a mix of humans and a few aliens who had chosen the freedom of living outside the strict rule of the Dominion. They were a family of sorts, each with their own reasons for being far from home. And Exalvera, who had once been a proud Zarkith noble, found herself beginning to care about these people, care in a way she hadn't allowed herself to in years. But her quiet life was soon to be interrupted. One evening, As Halvera was cleaning her weapons in her small quarters, a knock sounded at the door. She stood, her instincts alert, and opened it to find Elias standing in the hallway, his face grim. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tense. "I've received word from a contact. Someone knows where you are." Zalvera's heart sank. "I knew this day would come," she said, her voice calm, but with a tightness in her chest. "The Zarkith will not leave me in peace." Elias nodded, stepping into the room. "It's not just them. A group of bounty hunters has started moving in your direction. They're asking around, looking for any trace of you." Zalvera clenched her fists. "Of course. They'll come for the bounty, not for justice. I've made enemies, and they will not forget." Elias walked toward the small window and gazed out at the colony. "I'm not going to let them find you, Zalvera. We'll leave, head to a safer place. There are places even bounty hunters won't go." Zalvera shook her head. "You can't protect me forever. I can't keep running." She paused, her eyes darkening with determination. "It's time I faced this. I owe it to myself and to you." Elias turned to face her, his eyes full of concern. "No, you don't owe anyone anything. We've helped each other, but this doesn't have to be your fight." Zalvera took a deep breath. "It's my fight now. I was born a warrior. I'll fight them myself." For a moment, Elias was silent. He was weighing his options, and Zalvera could see the tension in his face. But finally, he nodded, though there was still hesitation in his eyes. "I won't stop you, Zalvera, but you're not going alone. If you're going to face these people, I'll be there to help." Zalvera appreciated his offer. She knew that if it came to battle, Elias and his crew would stand with her. They had proven their loyalty time and again. But this wasn't just about physical strength. It was about proving to herself that she could take control of her fate. "We leave tomorrow morning," Zalvera said, her voice resolute. The following day, Zalvera, Elias, and his crew prepared to leave the safety of Kelros 7. Elias had managed to secure a small, fast ship capable of slipping past most of the radar systems in the area. The plan was simple. They would leave the colony, head into the outer regions of space, and disappear until the hunters lost their trail. But as they prepared to board, Zalvera couldn't shake the feeling that she was running from something much larger than bounty hunters. This wasn't just about staying alive anymore. It was about reclaiming her life, her honor, and her future. Elias stood at the ship's hatch, ready to leave, but his eyes were on Zalvera. "Are you sure about this?" he asked once again. Zalvera gave a small, determined nod. "I am. Let's go." They took off into the sky, leaving Kelros 7 behind them. The stars seemed far too quiet, the vastness of space too endless. She felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. In some ways, this felt like the beginning of a new chapter, one where she was no longer a pawn, no longer defined by the expectations of her people. In other ways, it felt like walking into a storm. They traveled for hours, heading into a region of space, known for its dangerous terrain and uncharted systems. The further they went, the less likely it was that the bounty hunters would follow. But Zalvera couldn't relax. She had been trained to be vigilant, to trust no one. And now, with everything on the line, her instincts screamed at her to prepare for an attack. Finally, after several days of traveling in near silence, they reached a remote asteroid field. Elias sent a coded message to a trusted contact, a former ally who had ties to the underground resistance. It was the best place for them to lay low for a while, where no one would expect to find them. As the ship glided silently through the asteroid belt, Zalvera stared out the window. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps she could rebuild herself in this hidden place. Perhaps she could find a new purpose here, away from the politics and power games of the Zarkith. But the sound of the ship's alarm broke her thoughts. "Trouble," Elias muttered, his eyes narrowing at the sensor display. Zalvera's heart began to race. She knew what this meant. The bounty hunters had found them. They were too close to escape. Elias quickly sent out a warning signal, but the ship's systems were already being hacked. The hunters were good. Too good. "We've got incoming," Elias said grimly, as the first of the enemy ships appeared on the radar. "Get ready." Zalvera stood and grabbed her weapons, her mind sharp with focus. She had been trained for moments like this, but she had never faced anything like this before. The stakes were higher now, not just for life, but the lives of the people who had taken her in. And she would not let them down. The alarm blared through the ship, its red lights flashing as the bounty hunters closed in. Zalvera's pulse quickened, but her mind was clear. She had faced danger before, and she would face it again. The only difference now was that she wasn't alone. Elias was already at the controls, his fingers dancing over the ship's navigation console as he expertly dodged incoming enemy fire. "We need to shake them off," he said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "Hold on tight." Zalvera grabbed the nearest railing as the ship lurched to the side, narrowly avoiding a blast from the lead bounty hunter's ship. She could feel the ship's engines roaring beneath her feet, the vibrations of the thrusters as Elias made sharp, evasive maneuvers. "Where are the others?" Zalvera asked, glancing toward the crew quarters. "They're arming up and getting ready for a fight." Elias answered quickly. "We'll have backup in a minute. Just hold them off until then." The first enemy ship was gaining on them, its blaster cannons aimed directly at their ship. Zalvera's grip tightened around her weapon. It was a fight she had never asked for, but one she would finish. "Incoming missile," Elias warned, his eyes widening as a red warning light flashed. He spun the ship sharply, but the missile was already on its way. With a deafening explosion, the ship rocked violently. Zalvera stumbled but regained her balance, her body hardening into the warrior she had always been. "That was too close," Elias muttered, gritting his teeth. Zalvera didn't wait for him to say more. She moved swiftly toward the weapons bay, her mind already racing through strategies. If they wanted to survive this, they needed more than just evasive tactics. They needed to hit back. By the time she reached the weapons station, the crew was already preparing for battle. Tasha, a young human woman who had once served in the military, was loading up a blaster rifle. Cormac, a grizzled veteran from a distant planet, was checking his armor. "You ready?" Zalvera asked, her voice calm but firm. Tasha nodded. "We've got your back, Zalvera. We're not letting them take you." Cormac grunted in agreement. "Let's show them what happens when they mess with us." Zalvera gave a small nod. "We'll fight smart. We need to disable their ships, not destroy them. Keep them alive long enough to get information." Tasha raised an eyebrow. "You're playing the long game." Zalvera's eyes were cold with determination. "I'm playing to win." The sound of enemy fire rattled through the ship as the bounty hunters closed in once again. Zalvera moved into position, taking a deep breath before she stepped onto the ship's outer deck. The others followed her, ready for what would come next. Elias's voice came through the comms, his voice sharp. "I've got a lock on their engines. We'll be able to disable them in 2 minutes. Keep them distracted until then." Zalvera nodded and switched off the comms. "Tasha, Cormac, stay behind me. Focus on their engines." The trio moved quickly, the hum of the engines a constant reminder that they were running out of time. The bounty hunter ships were closing in, their weapons locked onto their ship. Zalvera's eyes narrowed as she spotted the lead ship. It was armed to the teeth, but it was also vulnerable. She moved with precision, her experience guiding her every step. As the first shot rang out, she fired back, hitting one of the enemy ship's thrusters. The ship swerved, its trajectory thrown off just long enough for Elias to get a clean shot. "Got their left wing." Elias's voice came through the comms. "They're slowing down. Take them out." Zalvera took a deep breath and focused. She knew they had a limited window of time before the other ships would adjust. The crew was doing their part, But the real fight was in the hands of those who could hit the enemy where it hurt. She aimed carefully, taking down another engine and causing the ship to spin out of control. The enemy was now disoriented, and Exalvera's team moved in quickly to disable their remaining ships. Tasha, Cormac. Now, Exalvera shouted, her voice commanding. Tasha fired, hitting the enemy ship's remaining systems, causing it to lose power. Cormac followed suit, his shots piercing vital systems. The bounty hunter ships began to slow, their weapons now useless. But they weren't done yet. The lead ship was still firing, desperate to regain control. Exalvera and the crew moved quickly to close the distance, aiming for the weak points in the ship's hull. The battle was nearly over, but they knew they couldn't afford to stop until they had answers. As the final shot rang out, the lead ship's engines exploded in a burst of flame. The enemy was disabled, but it hadn't been easy. Exalvera was breathing heavily, her body aching from the stress of the fight, but she wasn't done. "Check the wreckage," she ordered. "We need to know who sent them." Elias, his voice steady, came through the comms. "We're not out of the woods yet. Get ready." Exalvera didn't need to ask why. She could feel it. The weight of the hunt was far from over. The crew moved quickly to board the disabled ships, securing the prisoners and gathering intel. Exalvera's heart pounded in her chest, but she knew this was just the beginning. The Zarkith might have lost this battle, but the war was far from over. "Anything?" Elias asked, his voice tight with urgency. Exalvera stepped forward, her face grim. "Nothing we didn't expect. But we'll use this information. We'll find out who's behind this." As she turned to face Elias, a new fire burned in her eyes. The hunters may have come for her, but she wasn't running anymore. This was her fight, and she would win. The crew worked through the night, carefully examining the wreckage of the bounty hunter ships. Exalvera stood apart from them, her mind racing with thoughts. The attack had been brutal, and while they had won the battle, the real enemy still lingered in the shadows. She had been born into a world of politics, intrigue, and manipulation, but even she couldn't have predicted that her fight would extend this far. The Zarkith Dominion's reach was vast, and their tactics ruthless. What concerned her now was something more than just the bounty hunters. There was a bigger game being played, and she was caught in the middle of it. Elias approached her, his face tense, as he held up a datapad. "I found something," he said quietly, handing it to her. Exalvera took the pad, her eyes scanning the encrypted files. It didn't take her long to see the source of the bounty hunter's mission. The Dominion had placed a price on her head. But there was something else. A name, hidden within the files, one she had hoped never to hear again. "Lord Carthos," she whispered, her voice tight with recognition. Elias frowned, stepping closer to her. "The Zarkith nobleman you ran from." Exalvera nodded, her grip tightening on the datapad. "He's the one behind this. He's the one who has been hunting me." A deep anger began to simmer within her, but she forced it down. If Carthos was the one pulling the strings, then it meant there was more to her escape than just a desire for freedom. Carthos wasn't just a man she had rejected. He was a threat, a shadow that had followed her, no matter where she went. "We need to act quickly," Elias said, his voice low. "If Carthos is involved, then we can't afford to wait. He'll send more hunters, and next time, they won't stop until they have you." Exalvera's mind whirred with possibilities. She had known that running wasn't the answer, but this was a revelation she hadn't expected. Lord Carthos was a powerful man, a member of the Zarkith elite. He was known for his ruthlessness, his desire to expand his influence and control over others. And she was the one who had defied him. "We'll have to confront him," Exalvera said firmly, her voice filled with resolve. "But we can't just fight him. We need to know his plans. If we can find out what he's after, we might be able to turn the tables." Elias nodded in agreement. "I'll get the crew ready. We need to track down Carthos's movements, find out where he's hiding, and then we can make our move. The next few hours were spent in intense preparation. The crew worked together, using the data they had recovered to trace Karthos's trail. They didn't have much to go on, but Elias's contacts in the underground had helped them narrow down a location, a distant space station, one that wasn't known to many, but had recently been visited by a ship under Karthos's name. Zalvera stood at the helm of the ship, staring out into the endless void of space. The stars twinkled in the distance, so far away and yet so close. She felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, fear, and a burning desire for justice. Her life had been shaped by others for so long, but now, for the first time, she was in control of her destiny. "Ready when you are," Elias said, his voice breaking through her thoughts. Zalvera nodded, her expression hardening. "Let's go." They set course for the hidden station, the journey long and fraught with tension. Zalvera couldn't stop thinking about the people she had left behind, the ones who had been loyal to her, and she couldn't help but wonder what Karthos's true intentions were. Was it just about power, or was there something deeper at play? Hours later, they arrived at the station. It was a cold, lifeless place, floating in the far reaches of space. The station was quiet, its exterior battered by years of neglect. Zalvera felt a shiver run down her spine as they docked, a sense of unease filling the air. Elias glanced at her, his eyes serious. "We'll be in and out fast. We find what we need, then leave. No unnecessary risks." Zalvera nodded, her hand instinctively resting on the hilt of her blade. "Understood. Let's move." The crew disembarked, moving cautiously through the dark corridors of the station. The lights flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. It felt abandoned, yet Zalvera knew better than to trust appearances. The Zarkith were masters of deception, and this station could be a trap. They found their way to a small control room, where Zalvera's heart skipped a beat. There, in the center of the room, was a data terminal that held information about Karthos's activities. It was guarded by two heavily armed men. But they didn't see the crew approaching. Without hesitation, Zalvera signaled to Tasha and Cormac, and the three of them silently moved into position. In a swift, coordinated effort, they neutralized the guards, taking them out quietly before moving to the terminal. Elias quickly began accessing the data, his fingers flying across the controls. Zalvera stood guard, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. Finally, Elias looked up, his face grim. "I've got what we need." Zalvera stepped forward, her eyes scanning the newly downloaded data. What she saw made her blood run cold. Karthos wasn't just hunting her. He was planning something much larger. A series of attacks on key targets across the galaxy, aimed at destabilizing entire systems. It was clear that the Zarkith Dominion had something far more dangerous in mind. "This is bigger than I thought," Zalvera murmured, her voice low with disbelief. Elias looked at her, his expression serious. "We need to stop him before it's too late." Zalvera's mind raced. This was her fight, and now it was a fight for the galaxy itself. If she didn't act quickly, everything she knew would be torn apart. And she would not let that happen. The air was thick with tension as the crew gathered on the bridge of their ship, staring at the coordinates they had just uncovered. The data they had retrieved from the hidden station had confirmed their worst fears. Lord Karthos wasn't just planning to destabilize a few systems. He was preparing a full-scale invasion, one that could tear the galaxy apart. Zalvera clenched her fists, her jaw set in determination. The time for running was over. There was no turning back now. She had to confront Karthos, and she would do whatever it took to stop his plans. "Prepare for departure," Zalvera commanded, her voice calm but firm. "We're going to stop Karthos, and we're going to do it now." The crew worked in silence, each person moving with purpose. Elias, ever the steady hand, worked the controls, setting a course for Karthos's flagship. The rest of the team double-checked their weapons and equipment, readying themselves for what was sure to be a dangerous fight. "We're ready," Elias said as he glanced at Zalvera, his expression serious. Zalvera nodded, her eyes hard with resolve. "Good. Let's end this." The journey was swift, the stars streaking by as they made their way toward the heart of Carthos operations. The flagship loomed ahead, a massive ship of dark metal, its engines glowing ominously. Zalvera could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. This was it, the final confrontation. As they closed in on the flagship, Zalvera's heart raced. She knew the stakes. If they failed, Carthos' plans would unfold, and the galaxy would fall into chaos. But failure was not an option. "We'll board through the hangar bay," she instructed, her voice sharp. "Once we're inside, we move fast and hit Carthos' command center. No delays." The crew nodded, each one knowing the importance of the mission. Tasha and Cormac would cover the rear, while Elias would work on getting them inside. Zalvera would lead the charge, determined to face Carthos herself. The hangar bay doors opened, and they were inside. The cold, metallic corridors of the flagship stretched out before them, eerily quiet. It was a far cry from the chaos they had expected. Zalvera motioned for the crew to stay alert as they moved deeper into the ship. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat, but they pressed on, knowing the enemy was close. As they approached the command center, they encountered the first wave of Carthos' soldiers. The battle was fierce, but the crew was well prepared. Tasha's quick shots and Cormac's expert use of explosives cleared their path. Zalvera moved with deadly precision, taking down any soldier who dared to stand in her way. "We're almost there," Elias said over the comms, his voice strained. "Just a little further." The tension was palpable. Zalvera's muscles were tight, her every sense focused on the task ahead. The closer they got to Carthos, the more she could feel the weight of their mission. This wasn't just about stopping a man. It was about stopping the destruction of everything she held dear. Then they reached the door to Carthos' command center. It was heavily guarded, but the crew was ready. With a coordinated effort, they took out the guards and breached the door. Inside, Carthos stood at the center of the room, a dark figure cloaked in shadows. His cold smile greeted them as they entered. "So, you've come at last," Carthos said, his voice smooth and calculating. "I knew it was only a matter of time before you figured out the truth, but I'm afraid it's too late. The invasion has already begun." Zalvera stepped forward, her eyes locked onto Carthos. "You're not going to get away with this." Carthos laughed, the sound echoing in the cold room. "You think you can stop me? You, a mere rebel, trying to change the course of history. You're nothing." Zalvera's anger flared, but she kept her composure. "I'm not alone," she said, turning slightly to glance at her crew. "And I won't let you tear the galaxy apart for your own gain." Without warning, Carthos activated a hidden control panel, triggering the defenses in the room. Lasers and energy blasts erupted from the walls, forcing the crew to take cover. The air was thick with the sound of gunfire, and the room erupted into chaos. Zalvera dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding a blast aimed at her. She took a deep breath, then dashed toward Carthos, her blade drawn. He was quick, and the two of them engaged in a fierce battle, each strike a clash of wills. Carthos' strength and speed were formidable, but Zalvera had something he didn't: resolve. She pushed forward, blocking his strikes and countering with precision. Carthos stumbled, and Zalvera saw her opportunity. In one swift movement, she disarmed him, sending his weapon flying across the room. "You've lost," she said, her voice steady. "This ends now." Carthos's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Zalvera saw fear in his expression. But before he could react, Elias and the others stormed into the room, securing the area. The battle was over. Carthos was captured, his plans for the invasion foiled. But Zalvera knew this victory was just the beginning. The galaxy had many enemies, and the fight for peace would continue. As the crew stood together, looking out at the stars, Exalvera felt a sense of pride in what they had accomplished. They had stopped a war, saved countless lives, and proven that even against the greatest odds, victory was possible. But the journey wasn't over. Exalvera had a new mission now: to rebuild, to lead, and to ensure that the galaxy would never fall under the control of those who would destroy it for their own gain. And as the stars stretched out before her, she knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where she would be the hero of her own story.